Welcome back, everyone, to the seventh and, yes, final part of our Chapter 25 lecture series for your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. This final section is simply entitled 1968. The focus question for this section is, in what ways was 1968 a climactic year for the 60s? There are many ways that the year 1968 can be viewed as a sort of climax to the tensions that were boiling in the 1960s. First, in the Vietnam War, 1968 was the year of the Tet Offensive. This was a massive surprise attack by North Vietnamese forces across multiple locations in South Vietnam that occurred during the Tet holiday, which was traditionally a period of truce between the conflicting parties. This attack, of course, took American military commanders by complete surprise, and although they were able to push back the advances made at the initial assaults, this really shook the American military in Vietnam to its core, and it also shattered public confidence in the Johnston administration at home. This was also the year that saw the assassination of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. and the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, who was running for president in the 1968 election. In many ways, RFK represented the hopes of the youth movement in general, as he was the anti-war candidate. And in many ways, many thought that the hopes of that youth movement died along with Robert F. Kennedy, much as many thought that the hopes of the civil rights movement, especially the non-violent civil rights movement, died along with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. This year also saw massive anti-war protesters at the Democratic National Convention, where police attacked brutally these protesters. Most of them were young college-age students, and arrested numerous ones, and actually indicted 8 people for inciting the violence. And the subsequent trial of the Chicago 8 garnered massive press coverage, and although the charges were eventually overturned against the Chicago 8, the situation really called to light the pushback by the authorities on this student youth anti-war movement. The year 1968 was not only a year of turmoil and upheaval in the United States. This turmoil and upheaval really extended around the globe. This year saw massive anti-war demonstrations in many countries directly inspired by the U.S. anti-war movement. Authorities in most of these countries generally responded with great violence to put down these demonstrations. A labor protest in France almost toppled the French government completely. Soviet troops invaded Czechoslovakia to put down a democratic movement in that country. Mexican troops fired on protesters at the Mexico City Olympics. British troops attacked Irish independence protesters in Northern Ireland. Women protested for personal liberation and equal citizenship in many countries around the world, particularly in Europe. And women in Catholic nations like France and Italy won the right to divorce and obtain abortions. The turmoil of 1968, the culmination of all these social and political tensions caused by the civil rights and other reform movements of the 1960s, inspired a strong conservative reaction in 1968 during that presidential election. Richard Nixon won the Republican nomination and campaigned on behalf of what he called the silent majority, the masses of Americans who were not involved in any of these civil rights or reform movements and just wanted some sense of peace and stability to return to the nation. Nixon's election inaugurated a period of growing conservatism in American politics that would last for the next several decades. There really was a direct reaction to the turmoil caused by what was seen as too much of a liberal turn in the 1960s. The overall legacy of the 60s was really, or is really, these new rights and new understandings of freedom itself that emerged from these civil rights and reform movements, and the undermining of public confidence in national leaders, which really extends to the present day. And although the 60s came to be blamed for every social ill, especially rampant drug use and this, over-sexualization of the culture, but during the decade, the United States did become a freer country thanks to these civil rights and reform movements. And that's it, gang. We have made it to the end of our Chapter 25 lecture series for your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. As always, I hope you learned a lot. Study hard, and I'll see you soon.